On the edge of charted space, where the light of a dim orange sun struggled to warm frozen tundra and endless fields of silver wheat, the colony world of Cassandra turned slowly beneath a ring of debris left over from its own violent formation. It was not a rich world, nor a powerful one. It was a world of farmers, foundry workers, and soldiers who had never fired a shot in anger, tucked so far from the core systems that most imperial star charts required a second glance to even locate it. For 3 generations, House Draven had ruled here, not as tyrants, but as stewards, husbanding a fragile colony through famine, plague, and the long dark of interstellar isolation. King Rurik Draven had inherited a throne of granite and frost, a crown forged from meteoric iron, pulled from Cassandra's own soil. He had spent his reign building silos, not armies. He had never imagined that his greatest test would arrive not as a famine or a plague, but as a fleet of vessels that defied the shape of anything built by human hands. Vessels smooth and gray as old bone, moving in silence, without engine flare, without warning beacon, as though space itself had simply decided to fold around them and let them through. The Ashen Compact, as the newcomers would come to be called, did not announce themselves with violence. They did not announce themselves with words, not at first. They came instead with a single envoy vessel, small and quiet, drifting into high orbit over the capital city of Viraloon, as though it had always been there and had simply been waiting for someone to notice. What followed was not a negotiation. It was a demand, delivered in a voice that did not seem to originate from any single point in the room, a voice that pressed against the inside of the skull rather than the ear. Cassandra owed a debt, the voice explained, a debt accrued simply by existing within a stretch of space the Ashen Compact considered theirs by ancient and unchallengeable right. The debt would be paid, as it had been paid by 100 other worlds before this one, in resources, in labor, in tribute. And in this particular case, the debt would be paid in something else entirely. The voice named a price with the same flat indifference it might have used to name a shipment of ore. The king's only daughter, Princess Isolde Draven, was to be surrendered into Ashen custody, to be taken beyond the veil of known space and never seen again. This, the voice explained, was not cruelty. It was simply the currency the Compact valued most, a symbolic hostage from every subjugated world, proof of dominion more binding than any treaty. King Alaric stood in the frost-glassed audience hall of Virelin Keep. When the demand was relayed to him, his daughter's portrait hanging just behind the throne painted the winter. She turned 16, laughing at something just outside the frame. He listened to the translation in total silence, and when it was finished he gave his answer without hesitation, without theatrics, in a voice that carried through the stone halls and out into the frozen courtyards beyond. He refused. It was, by any calculation the Ashen Compact had ever made, an irrational choice. Every prior world had complied. Every prior king, chieftain, governor, and council had calculated the cost of refusal against the cost of compliance, and had chosen compliance every time. Cassandra's refusal was not merely defiance, it was, to the Compact's cold and ancient logic, a kind of madness. And madness, in their experience, was contagious. It could not be allowed to stand unanswered, lest other worlds within the debt web begin to imagine that refusal was even possible. Within the hour, the envoy vessel withdrew. Within the day, Cassandra's long-range sensors began registering the telltale gravitic disturbances of a fleet translating in from deep space. Not a punitive strike force, but something far larger, something that suggested the compact intended not merely to collect its debt, but to make an example so total that no colony world within 100 light-years would ever again mistake mercy for weakness. Word of the coming storm reached the Imperial Fleet outpost stationed in the outer Cassandra system less than 6 hours after the envoy's withdrawal, carried on a tight-beam distress relay that arrived garbled with the desperate haste of its encoding. Commander Magnus Rath received the transmission alone in the dim command blister of the cruiser Solvay's Vigil, and read it twice before he allowed himself to believe it. Magnus Rath was not a man who had built his reputation on speeches or grand gestures. He was known in the quiet corridors of the fleet as a man who solved problems before they became catastrophes, a tactician who preferred a single well-placed maneuver to 100 desperate ones. He had served under 3 admirals, buried 2 crews, and never once lost a ship under his direct command. It was this reputation, more than his rank, that had earned him command of the picket squadron, now standing sentinel over a colony most of the Empire had forgotten existed. He understood immediately what the Compact's demand meant, and what King Alaric's refusal would cost. He understood, too, that the handful of vessels under his command could not hope to stand against a fleet capable of subjugating dozens of worlds. But he understood something else as well, something the Compact, in all its ancient and calculating certainty, had apparently failed to account for. Cassandra was not merely a farming colony at the edge of nowhere. It was, quietly and almost accidentally, adjacent to one of the Empire's oldest fortified relay stations. The orbital bastion known as Aurelia's Crown, a fortress station built into the bones of a captured asteroid, a hard 3 days' burn from Cassandra's sun. Armed with defense grids that had not seen real combat in over a century, but had never once been decommissioned. If the Princess could be gotten off-world before the Ashen Fleet arrived, quietly, without provocation, without giving the Compact any reason to believe the Empire itself had intervened, she might be kept alive long enough for the situation to be resolved through channels far above Magnus Rath's authority. It would not save Cassandra from the coming reckoning, but it would deny the Compact the one prize it had specifically named, and it would buy time. Time in Magnus Rath's long experience was the only currency that mattered in a crisis like this one. He requested, and was granted, a private audience with King Alaric before the sun had set twice more over Varellon. The king listened to the commander's proposal in the same frost-glassed hall where he had refused the Compact's demand, his daughter standing this time at his side, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on the star charts unrolled across the war table between them. She did not weep. She did not argue. She listened, as her father listened, to a plan that would see her smuggled off her own world in the dead of night, disguised among a supply convoy bound for the outer relay stations, her identity buried beneath forged manifests and borrowed names. It was, both king and commander understood without needing to say it aloud, a plan built on the thinnest of margins, A single ashen scout vessel arriving early, a single leak among the convoy crew, a single miscalculated burn. Any of these could unravel everything. But the alternative was certain. And between a thin chance and no chance at all, King Alaric Draven chose, as he always had, to fight for the world he could still save, rather than surrender the one thing he could not replace. The evacuation began 3 hours before local midnight, under a sky already beginning to shimmer, with the faint, distant flare of gravitic wakes. The first vanguard elements of the Ashen Fleet, still days out, but close enough now to register on Cassandra's long-range arrays as a slow and patient tide. Princess Isolde Draven left Virelin Keep, for the last time dressed not in silk or ceremonial furs, but in the drab-gray overalls of a freight technician, her pale hair cut short and hidden beneath a work cap, her hands deliberately roughened with engine grease so that no inspector's glance would linger too long. She carried nothing of her old life with her, no jewelry, no portraits, no keepsakes that might betray her, save for a single iron ring, her mother's, worn on a cord beneath her collar, where no scanner would think to look. The convoy that carried her out of Cassandra's gravity well was, by design, unremarkable. 6 aging freighters loaded with grain, ore, and refined alloy. The kind of mundane cargo run that had crossed this system 1,000 times before, without incident. Commander Wrath had insisted on exactly this ordinariness. Anything more elaborate, an armed escort, a diplomatic transport, anything that drew the eye, would have announced precisely what the compact was meant never to suspect. The freighter chosen to carry the princess was the oldest and least impressive of the 6, a grain hauler called the Wheatfield Drift, captained by a weathered convoy master who had been told only that his newest deckhand was under fleet protection and was to be kept safe. No questions permitted. He asked no questions. He had flown this route long enough to know that some cargo was better left uninspected, even by its own carrier. For the first day of the crossing, nothing happened. The convoy moved at the unhurried pace expected of bulk freighters, threading through the debris fields that ringed Cassandra's system, keeping well clear of the more traveled lanes where an ashen scout might think to look. Isolde spent the hours working alongside the real deckhands, hauling conduit, logging pressure readings, learning, with the quiet, focused intensity of someone who understood that her survival depended on competence, not birthright. How to disappear into a role she had never been trained to play. It was on the second day that the convoy's long-range sensors picked up the first true confirmation of what everyone aboard had feared since departure. A single, ashen scout vessel, smooth and silent as a held breath, had translated into the system, nearly 4 days ahead of the main fleet's projected arrival, sweeping the outer lanes with the patient, methodical thoroughness of a hunter that already suspected its prey had gone to ground. Commander Wrath, monitoring the convoy's progress from Solvay's vigil at a discreet distance, made the calculation in seconds that would have taken a lesser officer minutes he did not have. The scout's search pattern would bring it within detection range of the convoy within 6 hours if nothing changed course. A course change of the wrong kind, sudden, unexplained, evasive, would itself be a confession. the only answer was patience wearing the mask of routine. A minor, entirely plausible diversion, logged as an equipment fault, requiring the wheatfield drift to fall back and make running repairs, while the rest of the convoy continued on, unremarkable and unhurried, exactly as bulk freight always did when something broke. It worked, but only just. The Ashen Scout passed within sensor range of the reduced convoy twice over the following 12 hours, its passive scans washing over the remaining freighters like a searchlight sweeping a darkened field, finding nothing of interest in 5 grain haulers running slightly behind schedule. It did not linger. It had no reason to, and by the time it moved on toward the inner system, the wheatfield drift and its precious cargo had already fallen 3 hours further back, out of the search pattern entirely, hidden not by any clever trick of engineering, but by the oldest trick in any smuggler's book, looking exactly as boring as everyone expected you to look. The relief of the scout's departure did not last. On the 3rd day of the crossing, with Aurelia's crown still more than 30 hours distant, the convoy's sensors registered something far worse than a single scout. The leading edge of the Ashen main fleet itself, arriving nearly 2 full days ahead of every projection Cassandra's analysts had made, moving with a speed and a directness that suggested the compact had abandoned patience entirely in favor of overwhelming, immediate force. Word reached Commander Wrath within minutes, relayed through a chain of tight beam bursts designed to be indistinguishable from routine navigational traffic. He understood immediately what the timing meant. The fleet's early arrival would place its outer picket ships directly across the convoy's remaining approach vector to Aurelia's crown within 18 hours, a window far too narrow for a fully loaded grain hauler to slip through unnoticed. There was, Magnus Wrath knew, only one way to buy the princess the time she needed, and it was not a way that left much room for a man to consider his own survival. Solve's Vigil and her 2 remaining escort corvettes could not hope to fight the Ashen main fleet. But they did not need to fight it. They needed only to be seen, to present themselves, briefly and unmistakably, as a target worth the fleet's attention, drawing its outer elements away from the convoy's approach vector, long enough for the wheatfield drift to slip past unnoticed in the resulting confusion. Commander Wrath gave the order to alter course toward the Ashen fleet's flank without hesitation and without informing Fleet Command until the maneuver was already irreversible. He understood precisely what he was volunteering his ship and his crew for. He gave the order anyway, and later, when historians would search for the moment Cassandra's story turned from tragedy toward something worth remembering, they would return again and again to this single, quiet decision, made by a man who had never sought glory and would not live to hear himself called anything but a footnote. The engagement that followed lasted less than 40 minutes, and no account of it would ever call it a victory. Solve's Vigil and her escorts struck at the Ashen fleet's outer flank with every weapon they carried, inflicting damage disproportionate to their size against an enemy who had clearly never expected so small a force to attack at all. It was enough. It was exactly enough. The Ashen fleet's outer picket, trained to expect fleeing prey rather than a charging predator, broke formation to respond, opening precisely the gap in its search pattern that Magnus Wrath had gambled everything to create. The wheatfield drift passed through that gap 11 hours later, her captain never fully understanding why the space ahead of him had suddenly gone quiet, only that it had, and that quiet was all he needed. Aboard, Princess Isolde Draven stood alone in the cargo hold's narrow observation blister, watching the distant, silent flashes of light on the aft sensor feed, and understood without needing to be told exactly what price had purchased her passage. The fortress station of Aurelia's crown rose out of the dark like something built by a civilization that had never once doubted its own permanence. Kilometers of ancient reinforced hull wrapped around the captured heart of an asteroid, its defense grid humming with a low, resonant power that had not been fully tested in over 100 years, and would be tested fully now. The Wheatfield drift was met at the station's outer perimeter, not by ceremony, but by the brisk, efficient protocol of a fortress preparing for siege. A docking clamp, a sealed corridor, a small honor detachment, whose commanding officer had been given only the barest details of who she was escorting, and had asked in the fashion of soldiers, who understood that some orders existed precisely so that questions need not be asked. Nothing further. Princess Isolde Draven walked through the station's inner corridors, still dressed in the grease-stained overalls of a deckhand, her mother's ring still hidden beneath her collar, and for the first time since leaving Virelin Keep, allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything that had been spent to bring her this far. She had not asked Commander Wrath to trade his ship for her passage. She would carry that knowledge, she understood, for the rest of whatever life this journey had bought her. Aurelia's crown's defense grid came fully online less than 6 hours after her arrival, its ancient batteries drawing power reserves that had not been called upon in a century, its automated systems running diagnostic cycles that returned, almost universally, a single verdict: ready. The station's garrison commander, a woman named Elowyn Vash, who had spent 30 years preparing for a battle she had privately doubted would ever come, gave the order to raise full shields as the first elements of the Ashen Fleet's advance guard came within long-range sensor detection, still hours from arrival, but closing. What followed was not the total war the Compact had originally intended for Cassandra itself. Denied its named prize, faced with a fortified position it had not planned to assault, and already bloodied by the unexpected ferocity of a single picket squadron it had dismissed as beneath notice, the Ashen Fleet's advance elements found themselves confronting a calculation their ancient, patient logic had not accounted for. The cost of taking Aurelia's crown by force now exceeded, by any reasonable measure, the value of the debt it had originally come to collect. The siege that followed lasted 4 days, fought not in a single decisive engagement, but in a grinding, methodical exchange of long-range bombardment and defense grid retaliation, each side testing the other's resolve without either fully committing to the annihilation. The opening days of the crisis had seemed to promise. On the 5th day, with its advance elements bloodied, and its main fleet still burdened by the slow, patient logic of a civilization that calculated cost before glory, the Ashen Compact withdrew, not in defeat, not with any concession of the debt it still claimed, but with the quiet, calculating patience of a creditor deciding that this particular collection had grown too expensive to pursue today and could be revisited another day, on more favorable terms. Cassandra itself endured the siege's opening days in a state the histories would later describe, with careful understatement, as costly but not catastrophic. A colony bruised by orbital bombardment and the loss of outlying settlements, but never broken, never occupied, never forced to surrender. The one thing it had refused to surrender. From the very first moment, the Ashen envoy's cold and borrowed voice had made its demand. King Alaric Draven stood once more in the frost-glassed audience hall of Virelin Keep when word reached him of the compact's withdrawal, his daughter's portrait still hanging behind the throne. And for the first time in the long, uncertain days since he had given his answer to the envoy's demand, allowed himself to believe that his refusal had not been madness after all. Princess Isolde Draven returned to Cassandra 3 weeks later, escorted this time not by a disguised grain hauler, but by a full imperial honor guard, her mother's ring no longer hidden beneath her collar, but worn openly, a small and quiet testament to everything the crossing had cost. She would, in the years that followed, become known throughout the Cassandra system, not merely as the king's daughter, but as the princess who had been smuggled through a war zone in a deckhand's overalls and had returned to stand beside her father, rather than vanish beyond the edge of known space. Commander Magnus Rath's name would be read aloud at fleet memorials for a generation, attached to a single, quiet maneuver that historians would call, with the understated precision the fleet reserved for its greatest sacrifices, a diversion of proportional consequence. 6 words that would never fully capture what it had meant to trade a ship, a crew, and a life for the narrow, precious gap through which a princess and a colony's future had passed, unseen, into the dark beyond a fleet that had come expecting surrender, and found instead the price of refusal paid in full.